All right. I am happy to welcome back to the program. We have Alicia Yusuf with us here today. Thanks for joining me, Alicia.
Thanks for having me, Mel. Nice to be here.
It's been some time since you've been on the program. I think we met for, I want to say Scorpio season, maybe 2020.
Yes, I think you're right.
And I remember you being outside. I think you were outside, and I remember their chickens being involved. There was a lot of there was a lot of clucking going on.
Yep, that was Fred, our rooster in our old house. Yep, sure.
Oh, I love I just got back from vacation, which many people may have heard me talking about for several months now. And one of the places when we stayed in Asheville, North Carolina, the Airbnb we got was right next door to a chicken coop with a couple roosters in it. And I got to really know some roosters, which felt really appropriate for Scorpio season for some reason. And like Mars retrograde in Gemini, or like actually Mars was about to station when we were staying there, and just waking up to that rooster every morning. And it just, I don't know, it felt right for the energy.
Yeah, they're definitely Mars with those sharp beaks and their claws. If you cross a rooster the wrong way, you'll definitely know the Mars energy of them.
Oh, really? I didn't.
Mm,
I will put that in my pocket for later. Never cross a rooster.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, today we are here to talk about Sagittarius season, which I'm sure many of us are looking forward to after, the eclipse seasons of Scorpio. I mean, the entirety of 2022. And you know what? Who doesn't love a little Sag after Scorpio, just in general?
For sure, for sure. It's that kind of uplift and inspiration that we often need after that deep dive of Scorpio season.
That's right. I need that. I need that kick of enthusiasm. I need that Jupiter juice
Yes.
to move me
Yeah.
along. But
Yeah.
before we get started here, Alicia, tell people who you are in case they haven't heard from you before. And yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm a consulting astrologer and also a counselor and writer, teacher, all those wonderful things. So I'm based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia, if you can't tell from my accent already, which is kind of semi-tropical. It lets me surf, it lets me hang with my family and just do all those lovely sunny things. So yeah, but I've been an astrologer since 2005, I think, 2006. But we were just chatting in the break. I dove into it full time in 2017, along with my Uranus opposition. So it was that awakening and that enlivening, that prod in the back of now or never.
Now or never. Oh my God. Yeah. That's we were sharing Uranus opposition stories before we got on the call here, because I'm currently in the middle of mine, and I'm like, Tell me what you know. Give me give me the dish." Not like I don't know already what's going on with
Yeah,
it, but
totally.
I'm like, tell me something good. No, but it's really now or never. It just feel. I mean, your early 40s are kind of like the pressure of time, anyways. It's just when
Hmm.
you got the Uranus opposition, you got the Saturn opposition looming. It's just, yeah, you're coming to terms with what you're doing in life, how you're doing
Yep.
it. Are you happy doing it?
Yep.
Has
Are you
something been
authentic doing it?
unfulfilled? Yeah,
Mm,
exactly. So
yeah.
it's been a ride, but necessary with all those life I don't want to say stopping points, because nothing really stops you with the Uranus opposition other than an occasional shock where you're like, what? Wait. But it is that kind of like quintessential pause to kind of catch up with yourself and what you're doing in life. So I guess that's another program for another time. But we've all been going through some Uranian action recently with this past
Totally.
lunar eclipse that happened. So, did you notice anything about these eclipses, or just I mean, just overview, maybe client work, world views, just something popping up?
Yeah, well, it was a really interesting time in terms of, the power and control and the movement there. That very scorpionic first eclipse on the 25th of October, and then the lunar eclipse on the 8th of November in Taurus almost brought the balm or the release to it all. I'm noticing just the war in Russia and Ukraine and what's been happening there, and how, after that eclipse on the 8th of November, we've had some easing off of pressure there, and the Ukraine gaining ground. What's been happening in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin was very interesting, around resources and, which resources are real, which aren't, where we're putting our money. And I've even noticed, I mean, it's more of a cycle this year, but food production issues seem to be coming to the fore again. There's been a lot of a UK environmentalist who's written a book around, do we keep relying on our traditional food sources, or do we start relying on things like algae and cyanobacteria and things like that to be able to support us going forward? Because, if we move to the population of 10 or 11 billion projected, we probably won't have enough arable land left. So just interesting, those kinds of themes that are being highlighted in it all. So I think in client work, it is definitely okay, what am I having to purge and let go of? That South Node supercharged in Scorpio, which is already a detoxifying sign. And then what do I really want to live for? What do I really want to grasp? What I want to hold on to with that North Node in Taurus? So, yeah. What about you? What did you notice? Anything?
I do love that. What do I want to live for? Just in general, sometimes I'll do little tarot gatherings occasionally, and I did one the other night, and I can't even tell you how many people have lost someone. Of all the people that I sat down with, a lot of people have been moving through some sort of literal death. It could be figurative in some sense, but it's the idea of what do I want to live for? Because a lot of these people, they were processing the grief, and the grief might have not even been in this eclipse season. It could have been just in the past, but realizing that holding on to this old emotional content was actually keeping them from living their best life. And so that was a theme that definitely came up just by sitting down with people and hearing, like random stories through the cards. But yeah, that sustainability component, especially with, material goods, and especially with money. I mean, the cryptocurrency thing, yeah, but here, of course, we had a really well-timed midterm election on the actual eclipse. I'm like, who thought of that? But it was interesting how many people, they thought it was going to be a red wave with the Republicans taking all control. And that's the thing, is like, if you want to break it down with the parties, which personally, I don't think there should be a two-party system, but Republicans are always known for being conservative or trying to be conservative with money, where Democratic agendas are more about people and the environment and these. So everybody going through this crunch of inflation and resources, like talk about food and going to the store, and every time I go to the store, something's like $1 more, and I'm like, how about $1 more? That, how much that I'm like raising something from $3.99 to $4.99. That's actually a big increase if you think about the percentage. Gas prices being crazy, and or at least here in the US. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Australia if you're experiencing the same thing. Okay. So it's like, well, and the abuse of that too. When we talk about the power, because I was reading how like some people, or like some bigger food companies are just, their increases have already met their profit margin that they need, and they're going higher than that because no one is stopping them. And it's not characteristic of, especially in the food industry, for a price to go up and then it to go back down. So that's like the thing that is a little worrisome right now, is like, if no one's capping this, we're setting this new bar that we can't really keep up with. So that's something I was noticing too. And in the voting arena, is that everybody's voting for conservative money, right? You're like, oh wait, these Republicans are starting to look a lot more attractive because they actually care about the bottom line. And I don't know if they do, but that's kind of the campaign promise that a lot of that politics stands upon. So that's something I noticed, which was interesting, but it all comes back to the resources there. So, but it's survival, right?
Yeah, totally. And it was interesting, I noticed, with the young voter turnout in your midterm elections as well, because it was the second largest ever, wasn't it? And I can imagine these are people really worried about their future, worried about the climate crisis, worried about women's rights, another
Yeah.
Taurus Venus thing as well, you know, and those were kind of the things that drove people to vote the way that they did and actually turn up and vote too. I mean, it's different here. Here we have to vote. Here you get fined if you don't vote. So yeah, for you, it must have been, yeah, just such a big change to have so many young people engaged and politically savvy and wanting to make a difference, which is good to see.
It is good to see. And I mean, I wish we were like that too. I wish that everyone had to. Well, it's interesting. It's a double-edged sword because I wish everyone would have to vote because obviously, let's hear everybody's what they got. But
Mm,
at the same time, it's interesting because not everyone is informed. And even us trying to stay informed, we can't stay informed, right? Like, say, for
yeah.
example, one of the things that were on the ballot here in California were there was a list of probably about, like 15 judge appointments. Now I go to research these judge appointments because I'm voting yes or no on this person who's been appointed, whether or not, and you cannot find anything that easily on these people or like their agenda or their record and so there's a lot of times what happens, at least in my own opinion about the voting process, is you're faced with these two candidates, you're stuck in this two-party system, and you really don't know anything. Like the only way, like this voting strategy here in the US, I find that a lot of myself and a lot of people go by is we go to look where the money is. Who's paid for this?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
who's supporting this? Who's against it?
Yeah.
Have how much of their own money have they used versus other, like, and I'm like, is that really the thing we should be looking for here in politics? But once
A
again,
healthy
that seems
dose of
very,
Scorpio cynicism.
yeah, as one should have. Um,
Yes.
but that's a very Taurus Scorpio thing too, when you think about it. It's like this dynamic
Mm,
of power and resources and who's putting, these people in these places that in turn create this fixed reality that in our survival. So yeah, it was just, a lot of that stuff. Um, but it
yeah.
it was a mixed bag. There was a
Mm.
lot that was actually pretty for me, like pretty had a nice I mean, I was on vacation for like 2 weeks. I mean, who am I to complain?
Best way to deal with
Um,
an eclipse
y-
season, isn't it?
you know what? And I'll tell you I'm going to say Mars stationing retrograde, especially in a square to Neptune. It was vacation central. Everyone that I was
Yep.
talking to, what are you doing? Oh, I'm about to go here or I'm going there. It's like everyone was on vacation and it made a lot of sense. It's like, I think we need a timeout.
Yeah, totally. It was quite an interesting, really, that 2 week period, wasn't it? From kind of the
it
25th of October through until the 8th of November, a lot happened with planets changing signs, Jupiter going back into Pisces again, Mars square Neptune retrograding, the eclipses. Yeah, it was one of the most concentrated gluts of astrology, I think, of the year. So I'm kind of glad we're out the other side and heading into
yeah,
Sag season, to be honest.
me too. And I think it was a blessing that I was out of my normal, routine to
Mm,
experience that, right? Because that's a lot going on. But if you put yourself out of what your normal thing is, it felt like, I don't know, it really felt like I was in the flow of something. And it
yeah,
wasn't my normal life. And I think at that time I needed that, right? Because, with Neptune, it's like, I mean, Neptune brings us a variety of things, and many of it is a mystery. But
yeah,
some of it is actually about going with the flow and kind of like imagining what could be. And I think a vacation does that for you sometimes. So that was a blessing. But
yeah.
like you said, Sagittarius season, I am here for it. So let us break down a little bit of kind of an overview of what the season holds. But before we do that, let's talk about just Sag energy in general, mutable fire. Uh didn't Kelly call it the wildfire? Is that wildfire
Yeah,
energy?
yeah, yeah.
Um
That fire without bounds. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I say Sag, what comes to mind to you?
For me, it's, when I meet people who are Sagittarians, I generally meet people who are travelers, adventurers, or inspirers, or preachers or teachers, it's all of this energy that kind of is like, as we said earlier, when we're coming out of the depths of Scorpio season, the intensity, the digging underneath, and suddenly we're like, oh, we look up and we see the stars. This is ruled by Jupiter. This is asking us to turn our face to the heavens and to find what we know. But this is the fire sign of Jupiter. This is the day sign of Jupiter. This is like action, risk-taking, and also that optimistic. I've got quite a few Sag friends who I love dearly, and they're always looking at the sunny side of the street, or the bright side of the coin. They're always trying to find the some call it Pollyanna view on things, but it is that positivity that Sagittarius is really drawn towards. And I think that will be an interesting Sagittarius season this year, is my feeling, because with Jupiter in Pisces, there's going to be tension there, but I think in general there will be breath of fresh air to coming out the other side of what has been an intense fixed sign Scorpio energy. Eclipses, Saturn still in Aquarius. There's been a lot of challenges, hurdles, and just shake-ups to happen. So I think there are issues with this Scorp season, Sag season, but I think in general it will just be that, okay, we can get moving again. We can start to go forwards. So
yeah. Well, it's all about outlook, right? That's the thing. Sometimes is it just depends on, kind of the energy we're putting towards something. And I find like that is so. That's the interesting thing about mutable energy, right? It's in these two spaces. It's all about transition. It's like, and to have kind of like, that inspiration of for transition and being in motion. And so we get out of this really fixed intensity that Scorpio can be. And that I'm a Scorpio rising, you're a Scorpio. We probably deal with Scorpio a little bit different. When you are it, you navigate it a little bit differently than, people that don't have it. And then they're like, ooh, what is this? But it's always this, I don't want to say the rainbow, because I don't want to make, Scorpio sound that bad or anything, but it's like all of a sudden you like will look up and you see that there's more. Right. Like you go through maybe the dark night, or you hit something that is really internal within the self that you move through or challenged by, or is a situation outside of you, however it works. Because usually Scorpio brings us something that does have a material that is a little denser to get through. And it's like Sag comes and it's like, okay, well, you know what? That being said, look at this possibility. Or maybe this road could open, or I have a vision of this. Could this be possible? And it's almost like this kind of like fire inside that is like the wildfire kind of starts to spark inside. And you're like, oh, there is more possibility and potential than I thought before. And I want to experience that, because I think that that's a big part of Sag's energy is it's like, well, let me go ahead and experience. It's like, we might not know. It's like, let me try this out. See how I feel about it. Let me try the, like there's a little more spontaneity to it. And which it can be very life affirming, right? Because how do you learn something best, right? This is very Gemini, Sagittarius, right? Gemini can read the book, can have the intellectual knowledge, can store it all within. But a lot of times until you do something, that means nothing to you, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I always think about that Gemini Sag as like Gemini's like the journalist, who's just writing down the facts, just telling the story, whereas Sag is the opinion piece writer. It's like, okay, this is what I've experienced. This is what I've learned. This is my wisdom. Here's my opinion on the matter. And I think, it's beautiful what you're saying about Scorpio season, because it can be that, and even more intensely this year, that detoxification, as we sit and we navel gaze in Scorpio season, we often come to some realization of what we want to release or let go of, or purge from our lives. And so Sagittarius is like, okay, we're coming to it with an empty cup. So it's like, right, now I've got the opportunity to fill it, because you can't fill a cup that's already full.
True.
So if we can come with that empty, emptier cup, it's like, okay, there are opportunities here that I can make the most of. And I think that this is on all levels, physical, emotional, and spiritual too, especially spiritual as Sag.
Yeah, and especially with Jupiter being in Pisces too, as you pointed out
Mm-hmm.
earlier, because that's a big component. And it's such a unique quality actually to us to be starting Sag season, and literally within the first day, we get a new moon in Sagittarius and Jupiter stationing direct on the same day. Like that is, if that's not like a hello Jupiter moment, I don't know what is. Oh my goodness. So that will be very intriguing. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But really that is what Sag is about is, you're changing from a Mars ruled Scorpio season to a Jupiter ruled state. These are two totally
Mm.
different planets. No wonder it's like, Mars brings the challenges that Mars brings, and Jupiter is like, what, but optimism, abundance, more, say yes, like live a little. So it's definitely a switch, but the lunations are crazy for this this
They
season, I have to
sure are.
say, with that Jupiter station on the new moon, and then we have a Gemini full moon that is going to be conjunct that Mars retrograde exactly. And so I'm excited to pick your brain about that. We also have mutable
Mm.
quarters. Mutable quarters are just a whole mutable cycle. This is when life moves on, especially when we get to a last quarter moon in Virgo. Like if there is any type of moving of the pieces of like your physical world and jobs and homes and, clearing it out, doing the yard sale, all that. It's always, I notice that every year we get to that last quarter in Virgo and something, yeah, just the life is tangibly moving. What else do we have? Well, obviously, as I said with the full moon, we got Mars retrograde meeting its halfway point. So we're almost halfway through.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bring out the balloons and the streamers. Oh my goodness. Any thoughts on this Mars retrograde in Gemini so far, or you've observed?
It's been an interesting period in terms of I feel like that stop start energy, because Mars retrograde, yes, it's about, more inward, more quiet Mars energy, but it's also Mars not behaving well. So I feel like it can be where, your foot is either too fast and too hard on the gas, or it's totally off, which I've really noticed, especially as Mars has moved further and further away from Neptune.
Yeah.
People are kind of like, great, I can go somewhere, but speeding too fast. So, you were describing accidents earlier. I'm seeing people burning themselves or hurting themselves, falling over and scraping. Um, Also seeing like malicious tongues, sharp tongues and sharp wit, getting people into trouble or causing them to rethink, what they say and how they say it. For sure, definitely seeing that between my two children, who are, one is very, very mutable. He's a Sag, and the other one is a Scorpio rising. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting with the not that is Mars in a peregrine position, right? This kind of rogue nature
Mm,
to it, where it just it wanders and destructs at the same time. Like one of the
yeah.
things in the Next Door app, other than cars getting sideswiped and things stolen and all that, is I one day I was reading, and I think it was actually around the Mars station, is someone had just randomly gone down this entire street and just slashing people's tires, like just car after car after car. And I was like, if that's not Mars in Gemini retrograding, I don't know what is. It's like the indiscriminate,
Yeah.
slash. I don't know this person. I'm working out my own issues, or I'm mad about something in my head, and I'm just gonna go destruct this. And it's like cars and vehicles have been such the target, it seems, at least in my world. But yeah, it's
Yeah. And it had so much power, unfortunately, in Scorpio season, because it was ruling
right.
all those planets traveling through there. It was ruling that South Node eclipse. It was even ruling that Aries full moon at the end of Libra season. And it just seems, I think this is one of the things of Sagittarius season. It's like, okay, exciting. We're out from underneath Mars. but it's still going to play its part through
Oh,
Sagittarius
it
season
will.
because of all the oppositions from Gemini. So, but at least it's not ruling stuff. You know
I
what I mean?
know. It's yeah, it's like it's a influence, but it's not like the determiner almost, or like
Exactly. Yeah, it's not
like
on
the
on the
power,
throne.
Yeah,
Mm,
exactly.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. So we'll meet our halfway point there. We'll have a very lively full moon, I'm sure. We also have Mercury and Venus who are pulling ahead from the sun. And making getting further and further into their evening star movements, and they'll be
Mm,
moving through Sagittarius and Capricorn, which is always another interesting side by side mix too, right? The zodiac, who thought this thing up. But so that will be an interesting transition with them too. And then also we have Neptune stationing direct, which is interesting in
mm,
regards to all the Mars Neptune square action and where Neptune's been coming into play. Actually, we're speaking here today on the Sun Neptune trine. After some Neptune action, we're actually speaking at a time when a lot of planets are caught between Neptune and Jupiter, kind of highlighting
mm.
the Jupiter Neptune conjunction that was earlier this year. We're in this special time. So I feel like us talking about Jupiter, but also Neptune is very potent right now. So
For
I think it's
sure.
a
Yeah.
good time.
It's also the Venus Jupiter trine today too, isn't it?
I know. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's coming. We're talking, in case you don't know, we're talking on two different, because she is over in Australia. I'm here in California. So it is night for me and it is day for Alicia. And so yeah, tomorrow is the Venus Jupiter, but today, yeah, it happens at like
Yeah.
1:30. So it's pretty much now.
Yeah, it's
Um,
this afternoon today. Yeah.
yeah.
Here. Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that's kind of the overview for this season. So
Hmm.
let us get into our breakdown. How is this all going to go down? And so I will I guess that was my caveat about if we share different dates and times. They might vary obviously because we are on opposite sides of the world, so do take that into consideration. But a lot of times, it just depends on what the moon's doing too. Like the moon's
Mm,
the moon's the one in charge here, people, when we talk about aspects being lit up. So
yeah.
that will always be a thing. So if you're
It's the
watching the
cosmic scoop.
video, yeah, that's right. If you're watching the video, I'm going to go ahead and share the chart here so that you can follow along with us as we move through. And so Sag season, let me move. Got so many windows open. Um, too many windows. Okay.
That's so
So
Mars in Gemini.
I know. Do you know how many tabs open I have on Chrome? Like
Yeah.
I don't even know how my computer is functioning. I have that many tabs open on Chrome. And it's like there's so many tabs, but they're actually now Chrome has a folder option too, where you can create a folder that's a tab, and then you can put tabs in the folder. So I have all these tabs
Oh,
with like, yeah,
yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
problem. Um
Mental focus. Yes. Is not a trait of Mars in Gemini, is it?
Oh my God. No, it's not. And it's like a bane of my existence. But you know what is nice though is like, because Mars is action, right? And it's flow. And I'll tell you, when I'm in motion, I'm like
Hmm.
5 steps ahead of myself. Like I know what I do have Mars square Saturn and Virgo. Like exactly. So caveat. But I will when I'm in motion, it's almost like this might sound I'm like, does this sound egotistical? I'm like, it's almost like a like it's like beauty because it's like I can just go from task to task to task to task
Mm,
because I
yeah.
know I'm like all these things that I need to do ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Um and
That
so
flexibility that
yeah.
I always think about it as the gymnastics that Gemini can do is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what it feels like. So connect with that if you can with Mars and Gemini here. Especially since we're about to have a trine with Saturn. And actually that's kind of what um is one of the identifier significant factors of Mars when we get into Sagittarius season is it's going to be on its way to
Mm,
make a trine with Saturn. So we'll get there in a second, but we think about that Mars Saturn action together and kind of purposeful movement. that is coming. So now Sagittarius season starts on 11/22/22. It's like it's got a nice ring to it there. Very early in the
Mm.
morning here on the Pacific coast. But yeah, so okay, so almost immediate new moon. I'm like reading my notes. Almost immediate new moon. Jupiter preparing to station, so that's a big thing, right? You know, Jupiter stations the next day on Wednesday, on that new moon, but you know, a stationing planet has its influence for a
For
good amount
sure.
of time.
Yeah.
Um, and then
Especially
Venus
one
and
of the outer
Mercury.
ones.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. What would you say influence would be for a stationing, especially like a stationing outer? Would you give it like a week, or what do you
I
think?
would, yeah, not, yeah. I mean, Jupiter and Saturn a week, maybe 2 weeks for the others, because if you think about even Neptune, like it's moving, I don't know, it takes days to move a minute when it's stationing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it depends on what it's influencing as well as to how much notice I take of it. But the fact that Jupiter is so influential when this starts, but already, with that, because we move in with the Mercury Venus conjunction too, don't we, with this?
We do. So right before Sag season begins, and it really, if you're looking at this chart, you see Venus and Mercury at the same degree still. Um,
Mm.
because they're kind of pacing side by side there. So we have this Mercury Venus conjunction together. We just came off of a Sun Jupiter trine, right? Because that's a big
Mm.
defining thing that happens 2 days before Sag season begins. And obviously, as we were just saying, Jupiter is stationing. So it's almost like I feel like we go into Sagittarius season with this awareness of Jupiter and what it's
Yeah.
trying to do and where it's trying to go. Um, of course we got it through water signs, but it feels like we take that information into Sag and also the new moon that's coming.
Yeah. And I think, we're coming out of that period of integration, because Jupiter's been in and out of Pisces since May 2021.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. This is the third dip back into Pisces. So it's an opportunity now to really act on our integration. What have you been dreaming about? What have you been emotional about? What have you been escaping from? And how can you integrate all of that? Act on what you've integrated with all of that, act on what wisdom came through, act on what understanding came through that retrograde period, is a sense of, okay, now it's an opportunity to use that Sag fire energy to move forward
Yeah.
with
And
speed.
yeah, I love that, right? Because it is all about moving forward. I think it's like the sun, meeting Jupiter in some way. It's like, okay, yeah, I can't stay here. There's nothing left for me here, or I want this too much. And in order to do that, I have to,
Mm,
I think about that Jupiter and Pisces component. Um, I was talking to Elodie about this on the last program, kind of
mm-hmm.
like a lot of us are in my mind, a lot of us are maybe clearing out some emotional baggage or realigning
Yeah.
with the spiritual, component within that is calling upon us for, to do certain things in our life or to let go of something. And like you said earlier, it really is a spiritualized journey through this. I mean, especially because that's what Jupiter focuses around in Sagittarius, but having it in that Pisces component too. We're talking about the end of the zodiac. This is the last of the
Mm,
last of the last,
yeah.
So there is this kind of, Pisces likes to get the descriptor of transcendent, right? We're transcending
Mm,
something. We're
yeah. Yeah.
um so it feels like we're transcending something, and then there's kind of new life that comes with that, right? Because I always think about Sagittarius too. Sagittarius energy, if it's that transitional energy where we're more aligned to like be enthusiastic about where things could go, and we're kind of expanding our viewpoint and seeing the bigger picture, and it's like visionary in its quality. It sets us up for Capricorn season, which is like, oh, I'm actually going to do something, right? I'm going to break ground on
Mm,
something or take action in a material space. to maybe put these visions into motion or something like that. So that's kind of like the whole space that I see off of it. But what do you think about Mercury and Venus running side by side together? Not far from the sun. So, the sun is still clouding their view a little bit. But what about those two in Sagittarius, especially with Mercury being in detriment there?
Yeah, I think I've thought about it like, it's like someone who has to get up on stage and they're super nervous. They've got a lot to say, but they're not in their natural habitat, being on stage. And so somebody sweet with some kind words comes up and says, you can do it. It's okay. That's that Venus balm, that Venus compassion and kindness. Know you're nervous and you can do it anyway. Just be bold. That Sag energy. So that's that sense for me. It's, I love Mercury and Venus together. I have it in my chart.
Oh,
but it's that idea of beautiful words and, thoughts of peace, and yes, sweetness within our communication, which I think is really needed in the world right now. So yeah, I'm hoping that is how that will draw out, especially after that new moon too, because it will continue on, because the moon will run into the two of them very quickly afterwards. So I don't think it's just that day. It's more.
Yeah, there's a continual. I mean, it's kind of baked into the new moon there, which is nice in the terms of an elongated lunation cycle. So we do have that, and I totally agree with you. The Mercury, I love Mercury and Venus together. It's like, it's creative, it's expressive. If you need to sell something or you need to sell an idea or sell yourself or sell a whatever, it seems apropos for that. And especially in Sagittarius, because it's almost like there's like Venus adds, like you said, a little sweetness, a little love, a little like being a little more just open to things. And here our head is thinking about kind of the bigger picture and the expanding. We're less about the details and we're more about like the gist kind of thing, and we're just more open to connecting with that. And really these two are just on a march to meet Mars too. So they're like slowly getting energized together, but having them on board, especially like a lot of times you'll see Mercury and Venus together in, artist charts or singers charts, there's like just this creative kind of expression. And so I feel like our minds are kind of like in a creative and optimistic space within this. And that doesn't mean you have to go paint a painting or write a song or anything like that. It's just more about, like it's not cold hard reality. It's like, what if potentials? I'm open to this. Let me think about that more, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think especially with this balsamic moon in Scorpio, that's going to be that kind of first day of Sag season. It's like, okay, well, there's still that, like, that sweetness of this connection between the two. And there's just a sense of thoughts that are towards partnership, thoughts that are towards supporting and accepting support too from others. So hopefully we're not all going into the depths that balsamic moon in Scorpio can create. We can reach out for support from others.
True. And there's something to be said about having our mind, like I like what you said before about, that's the thing with Scorpio season, was it was kind of difficult when Mercury was there, because Mercury was having this weird mutual reception with Mars that wasn't really helping anybody out. But now, even though it's in detriment now, at least it's backed by Jupiter in its own sign. And so even though Scorpio can be a little challenging at times, especially with the moon in its fall position, there's also something very healing about it too, depending on where we're at that moment. And so kind of having the headspace, kind of aligned with that Venusian energy, it's all backed by Jupiter, we're waning down into this dark moon that might be very soulful, but like optimistic at the same time too. It feels like a good, like maybe clearing out space in order to, especially when we just went through the sun trine Jupiter and all the Neptune action. it feels like, and then it crosses the South Node, it feels like a very
Yeah.
affirming, release, like drop something off before we get to this kind of fiery, like, all right, what's next in my life? So I kind of like that Scorpio moon there. It feels purposeful, I guess is
Yeah.
what I'm looking for. So let's go on and talk about let's talk about this new moon. Let's take a look at it here. So it'll be November 23rd, which is a Wednesday. It'll be 2:57 here p.m. On the Pacific Coast. So I think will that be like the middle of the night where you are, Alicia?
No, it's 9:27 a.m.
Oh,
here the next day.
yeah, bad math, but
Yeah.
so morning time,
That's
morning
all right.
time on
Yep.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have and what's interesting that I've noticed and like looking forward to the 2023 astrology too, at least until we get to that next eclipse at 29 degrees of Aries, is we have all these new moons that are happening right on
Right
like
at the
these
beginning.
early degrees where to me
Yeah.
is there's like this, early degrees are very much opening energy in my mind, or like something totally fresh. What do you think about these? What do you think about early degrees in general, or like lunations kind of sitting on them?
Yeah, they're like that very young energy, aren't they? Think about a toddler or a young child that's got energy to burn, and often it's there's a newness and a freshness to it that really suits that new moon energy. I also really love that this is in the terms of Jupiter as well, so it's like double down on Jupiter energy in this area of the sky too. So there's just a lot to be said for this new moon, and it's this sense of, okay, we're coming out of the previous season, the hope is there, and then the new moon's going to encapsulate it and carry us through with it. It's not like we're starting it on a full or a last quarter moon where it's almost like the energy's dying away or passing through. So we get to build clearly through the whole
Yeah.
season and make the most of it.
Yeah, it's kind of a special setup, I have to say,
Mm,
and it's not really like talking to anything else per se. I mean, it has left the trine to Jupiter, but other than that, especially we don't really have
mhm.
anything at early degrees of signs right now. No slower movers or anything. So these
Yeah.
luminaries are kind of on their own with Venus and Mercury there. I mean, I guess Venus and Mercury is starting to form that trine with Chiron. And Mars is retrograding back to trine Saturn, which I think is big, which is interesting that that's baked into this lunation too.
Mm,
Finally leaving the Neptune, it's separating from Neptune and it's moving to its second pass with Saturn there. So and obviously caveat, Jupiter stationing this day. So anytime a planet is stationing, it is just really potent in the skies. Um,
mm.
so it's special in its own right. But what do you think about that Mars Saturn action?
Yeah, I like Mars and
Nice.
Saturn trining. Not so loving any of the others, but the trine of these two planets. This is the second one that's happened. So the last one was late September, wasn't it? Yeah, 28th of September. So it's a sense of, the older warrior or the authority figure putting a hand on the impetuous young warrior who wants to go out and fight all the battles. And Saturn's like, yeah, but hang on, let's think this through. What's our strategy here? I'm reading The Last Kingdom right now, or the Last Kingdom series, if anyone else has been watching that. So it's a lot about swords and battles. And um, there's just this sense of when we come from that Saturnian space of discipline, of focus, it can add a lot to Mars energy. It's almost like harnessing the horses to drive forward in one way. So it smacks of that Capricorn, Mars exalted in Capricorn kind of energy with this. And I think specifically with this, Mars is energizing Saturn. I think this is the last meeting between the two of them before Saturn moves out of
Yes.
Aquarius. And I was watching, we have a huge mango tree in our backyard. And yesterday we had some tree loppers come in and cut cut it off. And I was like, oh, it's encouraging the tree to go up in one direction. So it's that opportunity to, I feel like, using Mars to slice away some of the Saturn in Aquarius plans that didn't work out, that may not have, been able to be solidified or clarified, to go, right, okay, this is what did work. This is where, where I've really gotten some traction. So this is what I'm going to follow now with the energy of this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And because I think what I was noticing, this could be just in my own life, but I feel like some other people have been encountering this, is, Mars and Gemini, like we said earlier, it kind of gets distracted. It loves ideas. It's like, get, this shiny thing over here, or this sounds interesting. Oh, I'm curious about that. Let me go see here. And when you have so many ideas, or potentialities, or we can only move in so many directions, maybe two if we're talking to Mars and Gemini, but no more than two. And so I feel like Saturn comes in and it's like, all right, well, which of these are most feasible? What are you most interested in? Like, you can only do so much. You can only learn so much. I can't, there has been so many courses thrown my way. I have books for days. I'm looking at this and I have to read that. And I'm like, I can't even get, if I were to start now, Saturn in, hone it down, and do everything that I have just kind of put before me, that'd probably take like 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Saturn's coming in and being like, okay, you are in information or learning overload, or, like, rein it in. Like you said, lop off the side interests, grow the tree in one direction, because that's the only way you're going to be effective with otherwise you're going to be scattered and you're not going to fully learn what you want to learn. Right. You gotta, and maybe that's where the whole Sagittarius component comes back in too. When we were talking about experience earlier, it's like, all right, well, hone in what you want to try out. And then as these oppositions come around, now it's time to like experience it, like get your hands dirty, or like book the trip, or go to the class or the workshop, like, less speculation and more form that then gets to experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. And I think once this past the trine too, because what we've got to remember is everything as it moves through Sagittarius will sextile Saturn. But so it'll pose Mars first and then sextile Saturn. So it'll almost be the hat on the hot tin roof feeling of Mars in Gemini. But then they'll all sextile Saturn, and so I'm like, okay, well, here's your reality check. This is what's possible, but this isn't. Or just because you can, should you? That kind of energy that's going on. So there's that opportunity. I think if we get this trine right, it can support us as we go through the whole of Sag season.
Yeah. And so, keep that in mind. Once again, we're talking about a new moon here. So this energy is kind of just baked in to the entire lunar cycle. So even though Mars will retrograde and move on from this position, we do have it energetically aligned to kind of sort these things out. Mars and Saturn are are working together to kind of rein in that rogue Mars that is all over the place here. So anything else that we're seeing in this, or shall we carry on to our
I think
next?
just the one last point I'd like to make, and this is going to come up more towards the end, or December especially, is the push-pull, the tension between Sagittarius and Pisces, because this is ruled by Pisces. So there is this sense, like the sun, the new moon in Sagittarius is like, let's go on an adventure. Both are Jupiter-ruled signs, so both want to expand, both want to look for opportunities. But Sagittarius is like, let's go on adventures, or let's go and seek knowledge. Let's get active and do it. Whereas Pisces is like, you know what? I'm just going to sit on the couch and dream it. I'm going to imagine it here. So there's kind of this tension between if you pour water on a fire, it steams or it might put it out. And I think this is the remembering here of, yes, we need to take action, but we have to check in with our intuition and our emotions as we do it. And that's the way to kind of handle that tension between the two. And again, I think if we can get that right under this new moon, because it's a little bit of a soggier new moon in Sag than normal, it's that, okay, well, if we can get that right here, like listen to your gut on what's good here. Be sensitive. around what plans you're trying, or, ideas you're trying to manifest at this time. And surrender. I don't think Sag does surrender as well as Pisces does, that's for sure.
No.
So it's having
No.
to balance the two energies here.
Yeah. And well, some things came up because I was just thinking, not a whole lot of earth going on.
No,
You think you're
none.
gonna get somewhere tangible right now? Probably not. You get those moons gonna help you along here and there, but right now we are in I feel like we are in vision mode and experiencing and learning and feeling and intuiting and all that jazz. So concrete results maybe not, but we are in a space to dream there.
Yeah.
But I guess, don't sit on your couch too much. You guys still got to get out there and
Yeah.
get that fresh air, experience the world. It's so interesting when two signs are being like, when two signs, you see this a lot with Gemini and Virgo, where if
Mm,
there's influence going on at the same time, it's like ruled by the same planet. So you'd think everything's on the same page to some extent. But it's not necessarily, because like you said, there's different, there's different elements at play. The modality might be the same, not always, depending. Jupiter signs and Mercury signs are different because they are in the same modality. But yeah, there's still tension there, even though it comes down to one
mm,
planet, one person kind of calling the shots.
yeah. They
So
both want the same thing, but how they go about it is quite different.
well said. All right. So we move on for, Jupiter stations direct that day. And, after that point, it's like Jupiter is starting to move forward. Granted, it's going to take some time, before it starts gaining some
Mm,
traction. It's basically going to be at 28 degree. It moves a degree by the 5th of December. So, we got a couple weeks of Jupiter just still at the same degree there. But that being said, the energy of growth and momentum and moving forward is literally moving forward. So that is a big,
mm,
just energetic push in general. Granted, I think it's going to take until we get to it getting back into Aries that we're going to see, that real Jupiter action happen. But there is
mm.
just this sense that something's going somewhere and we're not stuck here, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we move along, and on the 24th and 25th, so basically as Mercury and Venus move side by side, and Venus is going to be mirroring Mercury's moves there, we have the two of them making a trine to Chiron in Aries. Now, are you a Chiron person, Alicia?
I am in medical astrology, but I don't use it that much in transits and natal astrology. So
Mm.
I'm
It's
interested to
like,
hear your take on it.
well, I'm in and out of it. I notice it when it happens. Like yesterday we had a
Mm,
moon square. The only aspect that was happening with the moon was moon square Chiron. And boy, well, it wasn't yesterday or 2 days ago. Anyways, boy, were there like some issues that came up with like
mm,
irritation and anger issues and just um modes of being in the self that were creating like painful encounters with other people. Like that's
mm,
what I encountered there. But Chiron and Aries is interesting because it's it brings up, it can bring up some intense anger. It can bring up the not wanting to do things, like overdoing things and not doing things enough. It's like
mm,
dealing with personal assertion and how you go about that. And a lot of times there's just triggers around it, whether it's you're triggered to go do something for yourself, or you're triggered by other people, or other people are triggered by you, just there always seems
mm,
to be just like a trigger point when Chiron is involved, or when we get the trine, with Mercury and Venus there. It's maybe we're more aware of the trigger of assertion or anger, or being that Aries energy and doing things independently, or being out for yourself in some way, whether that's working for you or it's not working for you. It varies everyone, but it always seems to bring up something just sort of tender that we deal with, that's
Mm,
very personal. At least the way I look at it with the Aries component. So it's almost like, just if something comes up on the 24th or 25th where you're like, this is tender to me and I'm working through this, or I'm trying to understand this, or I'm trying to integrate it and find peace with it. That might just be kind of the flow
yeah.
that's going on there.
And it's interesting
Um,
because in medical astrology, this is heat in the head. This is too much heat in the head with Chiron. So it might be, like, as you say, anger coming out, or, issues in that way. So doing all you can to kind of keep yourself cool in that period of time, which could simply be swims or baths, or eating cooling foods like melons or cresses, or water, drinking lots of water as well can be helpful.
right. Tame that fire, tame that fire
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Because I feel like with the Chiron thing, what happens is it's like it triggers you and grabs a hold, but it doesn't let go, right? Because it's bringing up something
Mm,
that then, like, it's harder to get away from, because it's not just that moment that you're dealing with that you can move on. It's like all the other things that live underneath whatever that was that, you know, pokes at you.
yeah.
And so that's why it's kind of a tender space.
Mm.
Um, I know, but the moon moves into Capricorn, so maybe it's like, okay, get a hold of yourself. Knock off the drama. Let's get practical here. So that being said, with the moon moving into Capricorn and then Aquarius over that weekend there, this is when we are getting to the Monday with Mars retrograde trining Saturn. So, and then on
Mm.
Monday, the moon is actually on Saturn. So we're really going to be feeling that. It's almost like we get back to like work, or what,
Yeah.
to start the week, and we're like, all right, we're focused, we're ready, let's do this.
Yeah. Totally. And I think it's that opportunity to, it's going to highlight that Mars Saturn trine as well, as the moon kind of widens and expands the orb of that. So it'll be like, okay, what did you do last week? Is there extra energy you need to put into this as you're driving forward?
Yeah. And so it's like you had all that enthusiasm, right? You were saying, you're like, life looked a little brighter. You're like, I could possibly do this. And Saturn's like, oh, well, you have a plan for that? You got some structure? You got some structure around that dream? And so, and I like the Aquarius moon for a lot of times, because it helps you just kind of detach a little bit from the emotional self to
Mm-hmm.
begin with. So it's like kind of doesn't take emotions out of the picture per se, but it intellectualizes them and tempers them enough to where it's like, it gets to Saturn. It's like, okay, well, this needs to be done. I have to do this, or I want to look at this a different way, or maybe I need a plan or a structure. So to me, it just feels like it could be a very productive time, especially the early days of the 28th, especially the 28th itself,
Mm.
when the moon and Saturn meet. And it's because Mars is retrograding back over at this point, so it might not be new things you're encountering with, like we were saying before. It's like, paring it down. It's and
Yeah.
taking something to the next leg with a better plan or blueprint in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, well, that's interesting too, because part of this is like we have Mercury that is chiming in over from Sag too. So here we get our
Oh,
first
yeah. We forgot to
Mercury.
discuss that.
So, that's an interesting point. So, Saturn's trying to like rein Mars in, but Mercury is also like it adds a lot of energy to it. It's an interesting combination to have the three of them all kind of working. I wouldn't say they're working together per se, oppositions aren't necessarily together, but it does make you think, and pits you against ideas and such. So any thoughts on Mercury's involvement in this Mars Saturn business?
Well, I just think, if we just simply look at the opposition between Mercury and Mars in and of itself to tell us what it's going to do, like, this is that cat on the hot tin roof kind of idea of, Mercury is in a sign where it's uncomfortable already. And then suddenly it's in this opposition against this heated, inflamed warrior who's being almost dragged backwards. It's like, okay, I need to give a message out here, but what message? Almost like I can't even translate it. So I do think Saturn calms and tempers this down, but yeah, there's just something about this being a day to really be careful of, the mental wheels over, turning too much, having too sharp a tongue,
Mm.
or just trying to back away from communication in general if you can that day. Um, I do think there is an opportunity, with that Mercury sextile Saturn. It is keeping a lid on things and it's helping us be a little more concentrated than we would be. But I don't know. I just get this feeling of it's a day that we're trying to do mental gymnastics, but we might be falling off the bar more than we're actually achieving the flip, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that, because that's the thing too, is like Saturn brings a structure, but Saturn also brings delays or a piece that's
Mm,
missing, or, like just something that we have to pause, take a pause for the cause to some
yeah.
extent while we work through, something. But Mercury and Mars together always is going to bring up just, yeah, like the mental gymnastics kind of energy, or just like you have a gymnast, doing the when they flip on
Mm,
the bar over and over
yep.
again, like that's going on in
Yep.
your brain basically.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
it doesn't stop, so there is like there's a high chance of anxiety maybe at the beginning of the week too, or just a lot of nervous energy to move off of.
Mm,
And I would definitely take the heed of what Alicia said about watching the tongue, so to speak. um or maybe that's where Saturn can help come in, or if the tongue's a little too off the cuff, you might have the immediate repercussion of what that is, because Saturn's also attached to it too. But just trying
yeah,
to be
those
more,
consequences.
yeah, there's consequences.
Mm,
So be purposeful with your speech, and your thoughts, and just know that it's probably just going to be high energy. Or you might
yeah.
have deadlines that you're on. Saturn can bring a deadline
Mm,
too. And all of a sudden, like if you're like me, both of us, we write, and all of a sudden I have to
mm,
write all this by this certain time, or, like you feel this pressure of something that is expected of you. That's more of an intellectual capacity. So that's a thing too.
yeah.
So yeah, that is, I like this week, but there's also a lot to it, and it's still a wild card to some extent. Um, Now, of course, Venus is going to move. We're going to have actually first quarter in Pisces on
Mm.
Wednesday, the 30th, which is always interesting. We're pushing off of Pisces, which is it's a loose push.
We're pushing off, but it's underwater.
Yeah. It's like,
You got to swim to the surface first. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I like that. It's kind of like swimming to the surface. Um, which I don't know if you ever swam to the surface and you're pretty deep and you're like, how much breath do I have? And you're like, oh, trying to get up there, like just propelling yourself, and then you merge out of the water and you take the deepest breath ever. And you're like, oh my goodness. Thank goodness.
I love that analogy. That's a great one, Mel. Yeah.
Well, we might feel like that when we kind of come up for air there. But, first quarter
Mm,
moons are always a little tense in the emotional department, right? Because we're trying to get something done,
mm,
or we're ready to go, or we're confronted with something that comes to us that we're like, what's this? And
yeah.
so it could be a little on the emotional side there, especially as it squares all the Sag energy one after another. So I guess don't push yourself too hard on about
Mm,
midweek, Wednesday, Thursday, as the moon goes over those 2 points. But it is something to say about the moon finally making it to conjunction with Jupiter, having moved, at this point too, which will happen on Thursday, December 1st. So that's, if we're going to get kind of like an integration of that planet, that could be a good day for that.
yeah, for sure. And with Mercury getting closer and closer to that area too, because that's the same day Mercury squares Neptune, isn't it?
It is the
Is it?
same
Oh,
day.
oh, it's next day for you, I think.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, about December 1st, December 2nd,
Mm,
um, we have this, the moon's moving over Neptune and Jupiter. Mercury is squaring Neptune. And so it's almost like that earlier part of the week where we're like, go do this, think this. And it's like,
Mm,
oh, I just need a second. I need, my brain cannot focus anymore. Or I just need to kind of soft focus to intuit things better. Yeah, it seems like a drastically different kind of shift within the week, just as days go by.
for sure.
So what's interesting about this time too is that Mars retrograde, even though we know when Mars reaches its opposition with the sun, or any outer planet reaches the opposition of the sun, it becomes it's close to the Earth. And so on the 30th, right around that time, Mars is actually in its perigee position, where it's the closest to Earth that it gets by proximity, in the cosmos. So it's an interesting, to me, that seems like a lead up time of like when Mars energies are going to be very present as we lead to this full moon in in Gemini. Um
Mm,
and so it's almost like we get through this kind of Neptunian space, this Jupiter space, but in the background there's this pressure of just Mars, and what are we doing? Where is this going? Like, because that's essentially, I mean, what do you, I'm gonna see, because we only have so much time here today, so I want to make sure we get through the
mm.
meat of what's happening with this season. And I think that the well, all right, it's hard to jump ahead too much because
You know, it's
there
a
are
funny
some
month for
things
that, isn't it? Yeah, there's a lot
there are
going
some
on that.
things happening. So just to
Mm,
give I'm going to give up a lead up here. So basically, we have Mercury and Venus having got through the Mars action, has sextile Saturn. Then they basically come to squares with Neptune, as Neptune is stationing direct. So there is this December 1st through December 3rd where there is serious Neptune vibes taking place on this planet, but especially when the moon
yeah.
is in Pisces there, around
Mm.
late that week. And so, I mean, any words on Neptune just stationing and then those two planets kind of contesting with it?
I feel like, especially squares with Neptune, this is when it's glamorizing, or it's, hidden influences can most come to the fore. So my suggestion here would be, especially because both these planets have just opposed Mars, is there might be some impetuous energy towards thinking or towards relationship. And you just have to make sure that you're not being led up the garden path with
Mm,
that. Or, there isn't some, in we think about glamour now as fashion, but actually glamour is an old word for magic. And so it's this sense that, make sure that there's not a glamour on you, or that you're trying to place a glamour on somebody else. And look, nefariousness can be a part of what this is about, where we deliberately pull wool over others' eyes. But I think it's less about that, and it's more about just be careful that you're not taking a path that you will look back in a week or so's time when everything moves into Capricorn and go, oh God, should I have gone there? Should I have gone out on that big night out and gone drinking and, bumped into my boss and said all the things that I did? Or should I have, matched yes with that person on Tinder? And, it's like, okay, just be careful of the choices that you're making in this period of time, because you may not have all the information, or all the information may not be that clear.
absolutely. It's like, it makes me think of all that glitters is not gold at this time. And so,
Yeah.
take things with a grain of salt, like don't fully wear the rose colored glasses, maybe dip them
Yeah.
down for and be like, okay. Um,
Yeah.
and just give yourself some space during that time, right? If things are a little uncertain or not as clear, or you're a little foggy, or you have lower energy, even though Mars
Mm,
is doing something too. So it's interesting. It's always interesting when you have low energy, but you have anxiety that's below it too. That
yeah.
where, what that
Yeah.
feeling that's
Tired
like,
but wired.
I'm tired but wired. Exactly. So it could be a
Mm,
little bit of that too, but definitely what Alicia said, take have a caveat, especially that weekend if you're going out on some dates and you're like, this person on paper, this person looked a lot better than they did on yeah, there's some
yeah.
mirages out there right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically, yeah. So we encounter this Neptune action, Neptune stationing direct. There could be a lot of just something that emerges from that time too that was connected with the Mars
Mm,
retrograde square Neptune. So maybe if there we were under some sort of haze or filter or uncertainty, maybe something can kind of almost clear up at that time too. Not completely, but you turn a page, or like maybe that's when you find out it like there's some deception at play, or if there you knew there was before but you didn't have specifics, because a planet that stations direct is emerging. So what is Neptune emerging? What is it kind of like bringing to
mm,
the surface? So just be aware of that. And it could be turning a page too when we were talking about the idea of a lot of people going through loss or grief, and we're in
mm.
Sagittarius and trying to move along things, and Neptune's emerging, and it's like, all right, I've internalized that enough. Now it's time to move forward. So as with astrology, there's so many ways this could play out, right? So
For
many, so
sure.
many different facets.
Yeah.
So now that being said, one of the things that happens after that is, Jupiter's not far from Neptune. So as planets go on, it's like in Sag, they're basically squaring Neptune and then squaring Jupiter. So
Mm,
we are, we're waxing towards this big full moon in Gemini that is coming on December 7th. But along the way, we're gonna have Mercury who squares Jupiter on the 5th, which will be a Monday here, Pacific time. And then is going to ingress into Capricorn, which is interesting because this is a big move in my mind because, Mercury is going to square Jupiter, move into Capricorn, but then we're going to have our Mercury full moon, Mercury ruled full moon with Mercury now in Capricorn, which is definitely a different feel. So any thoughts about that kind of like that movement of Jupiter action and then moving to Saturn sign and then kind of influencing a full moon?
yeah, look, I think this is the ground, this is the earth we need right now,
Yeah.
actually, and it's interesting because I think right as it happens, the moon is at the end of Taurus too. So it's like, okay, we're finally getting our feet on the ground, been floating up in this Sagittarius hot air balloon. And this is an opportunity to kind of go, right, I'm more settled. And you've got Mercury there in its own terms as well. So it's getting some dignity back. We're able to think with more clarity. We're able to be more logical and rational in what we're doing. I think Mercury really enjoys those earth signs because they match its need for the facts and the bare facts, and what it's trying to get there. So I do think it's going to bring some coolness and some clarity that will be much needed under that full moon. If we'd had Mercury still in Sag with that full moon, that I think I would be more concerned about it and what
Yeah.
it could create than having that. Okay, we're in an Earth sign now, and we're not just an Earth sign, we're in Saturn's Earth sign. So it's like, okay, how are we going to get real, strategic, and practical with what we're going to do?
Absolutely. I think that Mercury in Capricorn is a saving grace for this full moon. And for Mars actually, moving the Mars's
Mm,
retrograde cycle. It's like, it's been through Scorpio, it's been through Sag, and finally it's Capricorn. It's like, all right, someone is speaking structure here, like the voice of reason has entered the building now
yes,
to some
yes, I
extent.
love that.
And we're gonna need that during a lit up full moon. So let's take a look at that full moon because once again, the cosmic dance, it's like, really, you're gonna give us a full moon almost to the minute conjunct,
I know, it's crazy.
Mars retrograde. Um, but obviously within the full moon, this means that Mars retrograde is at its midpoint of the cycle and it's in opposition with the
Mm.
sun. So, what do you have to say about this Sun Mars retrograde opposition and this point of Mars's cycle?
Well, I think this is really, as you say, we're at the midpoint of this cycle, and full moons highlight. They're like a spotlight, but
Yeah.
very much an emotional spotlight. And so it's a sense of, okay, as you were talking earlier about the anger that has been coming up, or the irritability, or the frustration, this might be spotlighting exactly what's causing it. or what it is internally that you're not doing, or not the needs that you're not meeting in yourself that are causing these issues for you. So I think it's going to bring a big spotlight for Mars retrograde in general, and what that cycle has meant to this point, which really, it ended its shadow on the 8th of September. So it's been a theme for most of this last quarter of the year. So it's an opportunity to get to know it and emotionally integrate it. As a therapist, I work a lot with somatic therapy, and I think it's a great antidote to this Gemini energy. So it might be just having to sit with all the big feelings that are coming up and breathe through them, and know that, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of energy. So yeah, but I do think, this can bring up anxiety. It can bring up a lot of worries and fears as that moon, that the emotionality of the full moon meets the heat of this contained retrograde peregrine Mars. So there's a sense of what's reality and what's not, needing to really keep your finger on that pulse of what Mercury and Capricorn can tell you of, okay, and if you can't yourself, then check in with friends, check in with your more Saturnian friends who can say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense, or that's just your fears speaking, or that's just your monkey mind going right now. So see how you can do a cathartic release. And I'm a big one for journaling. I think this is a full moon to journal, journal, journal. Get all your emotions out on paper and burn them. This isn't the kind of stuff that you want to keep. This is the stuff that you're going to burn. Think about it like a garbage emptying out of the mind. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Mel?
I like that, taking out the mental garbage.
Yeah.
Just like take it out. I love that because, a lot of people do that on the full moon. They're like, write something. A lot of times they might write intentions or something and they burn them, or, but if there's any type of release and that anger or frustration or mental anxieties about, kind of uncertainties in life or whatever they might be, I totally agree. Write it all down, burn it, get rid of it, have a cathartic moment, do it with friends, make it a gathering, because this is a loud full moon to me. Even though Mercury will be in Capricorn, you can't get Sag and Gemini in the same room and there not be some sort of like back and forth party here. So it's like I feel like the world stage is going to be very loud at this time, and it could definitely be political based if, we have Mercury in Capricorn, or, looking to the powers that be and the structures and sharing announcements of sorts, we're probably going to hear a lot of that. But it's interesting too, because part of this full moon, the moon and Mars together are always going to be, it's a very combustible combination. It just is.
Yeah.
Because those two planets, the moon is sensitive, Mars is brash. They're, it's not necessarily a welcoming combination. However, there is something to be said about them being in, Mars has just moved off the trine to Saturn. The moon is going to make a trine to Saturn. I think it's the next aspect that it makes after it leaves this full moon. And, Saturn is ruling that Mercury there too. So once again, I feel like it's not completely, like, it could be so, off the cuff and like crazy if it was just punchy Gemini and Sag together. But we have this trine of Saturn influence. We have the coolness and the collectedness of in the practicality of Mercury in Capricorn there. So what's interesting is, one of the things I always say about anger is it's like, it can be combustible, it can be destructive, but what it is, it's informative. And so
absolutely,
anger can be entirely informative at this time. But what do you do with that information? Are you going to put it to good use? That's what does Capricorn like to do? It likes to use things, like to put things to good use. And so it's like, what are you going to do with that information? Now you know that you've reached your last straw with this. What are you going to do about it? What's the plan?
Yeah.
You're just going to stuff it down, pretend like it doesn't exist? Or are you going to be like, you know what? I'm going to make decisions from this point that don't, that honor that release that gets me farther away from that, I feel like that can be a component of this time too. But it's once again, I feel like it's another wild card full moon where, we could like have all these different prospects of things that could happen. But I don't know, with mutable
Who
energy and
knows?
Gemini and Sag, you really just don't know. Like,
Totally.
but it'll be
Totally.
lively. It'll
Yeah.
be impactful. It'll
Yeah.
affect you in some way.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah, I love what you were
in the
saying,
head.
that idea of let the anger be the signal that's telling you something's wrong. And then Saturn can be the boundaries or the consequences that you're putting in place to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Because the sun's there too, right? The sun is all about
Mm,
conscious awareness.
yeah.
Like, integrate it. It's
Mm,
like, it's shine the light on it. Get down, get down to it. Um, and yeah, and then and do something about it. And it could entirely be a mental thing too. That's the thing too. Is like, maybe you don't make changes in your everyday life about what's going to change. Maybe it's just the mental process, or what you're feeding inside here, because we're talking about air signs, and air signs, this is mentality, this is sociability too. That's the thing. It
mm.
was like, there's probably be a very social full moon there too. So once again, I feel like we're back to watch how you act, watch what you say. you know
Watch who
it's
you connect with.
Watch who you
Yeah.
connect to. It there's interesting, it could be interesting consequences. Watch yourself on the road, all
Yeah.
that type of things. But
Mm,
but I think we can guarantee that it will be lively and it'll be informative, and you'll
for
remember
sure.
it. All right. So that being said, Venus at that time is moving to square Jupiter too, because she's getting to the tail end of Sagittarius as we go through this full moon. And so she squares Jupiter, who's Jupiter's at the 29th degree of Pisces now, right? It is getting ready
Mm.
to leave soon. Pisces is about to be over with. So she's kind of, I feel like she's the bearer of the last Sag message, I think, or last Jupiter message, by a planet that's not the moon there. But it is interesting here, especially December 8th, which will be the 9th in Australia. We have this late degree Gemini moon, coming off the full moon, that's lighting up the Venus Jupiter component in a T square. So any thoughts on Venus squaring Jupiter and then moving into Capricorn, kind of repeating that Mercury move?
Yeah, well, I really like that it's actually Venus that gives Jupiter the last kiss before it moves on into Aries. So it's like, at least it's the two benefics coming together. And
Yeah.
yes, it's square, so there will be some tension, but I think it's almost like that because the moon will be I think moon hit just moves into Cancer a couple of hours
Yeah.
earlier. So
Mhm.
it's the sense that maybe there's a little bit too much indulgence or pleasure. Maybe we've got a
Yeah.
little bit too much of a sweet tooth with this. But yeah, I feel like, you know, this plugs into the larger cycle of Venus conjunct Venus and Jupiter together, and that started in late April, and all that stuff was going on there with the Jupiter Neptune. So maybe this is an opportunity to be revisiting your dreams around whatever you were visioning creatively or relationship romantically at that time, and go, okay, were they good dreams, or was Neptune making too much of a clouded, foggy fantasy for me? And how can I kind of revision things, or re-step towards things in a new way with more of the clarity and the energy of this Venus in Sag? So yeah, I really like this. Um, I'm kind of excited for that day, actually, personally, of that last kind of, okay, this is the amplification that Jupiter wants to make from Pisces. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And it bodes well, I think, for, just the forward direction in relationships, like, it's
Yeah.
like, how's this relationship moving forward? Where are we going with this? What are we dreaming together? And all types of relationships. Obviously, it doesn't have to just be romantic relationships, but there is this, how are we coming together for the future type of things?
Mm,
We on the same page with that. Let's get some energy behind it, right? Because a lot of times
yeah.
squares, there's conflict, but there's also activity. And so it just means
Yeah.
something is moving forward there. So, the two benefics getting together, it can't be all that bad, right? So,
No, no, exactly.
um, it
It
will
could
be
be just
interesting.
too much of a good thing. That's all.
Yeah. It will be interesting in relation to a lot of the women's rights stuff that's been going on. I have to say,
Mm.
when it talks
Oh,
about, like decisions being made and kind of like court stances. And so I think that will probably be pretty active during this period too, especially since we're sitting at the last degrees of signs. So it's
yeah.
it's a really, pardon the pun, pregnant issue. Like it's,
Yeah,
it
totally.
is fully developed, and it is at its final type of thing. Not completely, but there's something about that energy that is there
Mm.
with that. So just watch for that. And then Venus moves into Capricorn, which is a totally different vibe for Venus. Everybody's getting, this is the time of year where everyone starts to get on Saturn's team, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's Saturn is about to take hold here. And so Venus is kind of cooling off in Saturn's zone, and she is, getting back to like maybe the free willing of Sag. Now she's like, I'm looking for commitment. What do they call that here? I've seen it termed like cuffing season, where you cuff people for the winter because you don't want to be alone. So you get to with someone that you want to be with
Really?
when you really need a snuggle buddy, and you're like, we're together for this time because we need to keep each other warm.
Oh.
Yeah, like that's a thing. I heard it during the pandemic. I think it was really a thing during the pandemic, just because
Mm.
you really needed to cuff someone.
Yeah.
But that's what it makes me think of was Venus moving into Capricorn there.
Well, I think both Mercury and Venus moving into Capricorn at this time of the year, it'll be interesting what goes on in the retail sector in terms of
Yeah.
sales before Christmas, because something I forgot to mention with that new moon is it's right around when the Black
Friday
Friday
happens.
sales are going
Uh-huh.
to happen. So I think people might go a bit crazy at that period of time. And then suddenly they're entering here going, oh God, yeah, I've done all the spending I can do. So maybe when we're, curbing our pleasures or curbing our luxuries or curbing our commerce with Mercury as well. But I do love that, Venus in Capricorn is, I work at a vintage fair once a quarter, and it always makes me think about Venus in Capricorn. Everything old is new again, and this practical approach to, I can use something old to look beautiful, or I can look to old traditions. I've got a few clients with Venus in Capricorn, and they're people who dress from different eras. One who loves to dress in we call them the bebop girls here, like the
Mm-hmm.
the 50s fun and
Mm-hmm.
flair, and another in that kind of 1930s style, and it's beautiful. And I also think this is an opportunity to, as you say, get settled, get stable, and get committed when it comes to the relationships of people that we're with. So, Venus in Sag is very expansive, and of course, wants to connect with all the things, and has been in that dance with Neptune. And I think this might be the time where it's like, okay, the glasses come on, we're seeing the situation for the reality that it is in
Yeah.
terms of the partnerships we've formed. So it might be that period where we're kind of getting a bit dry, getting a bit clear, going to the Betty
Yeah.
Ford Clinic of relationships.
Well, which is very fitting as Venus squares Jupiter right before it happens. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at this point in the cycle here, the only remaining player is the sun in Sagittarius. Everyone's moved on
Mm.
to Capricorn here. So, but the sun is making big moves, because from the 12th to the 14th, the sun is doing the Neptune square to Jupiter dance, right? Like
Mm.
the end of Sag season is moving through both of this Neptune Jupiter energy, which to me it's like, what's surrendered, what's let go of, what do we, kind of
Yeah.
dissipate and part with, and what do we grow towards, and it's like this one doesn't precede the other, right? Just as you were saying earlier with the idea of like, you can't fill a full cup. So it's like
Yeah.
Neptune likes to, Neptune stabs a hole underneath your cup and it all just falls out.
Yeah.
And then Jupiter comes back around and is like, I've got this nice better cup for you. How about this? We'll fill this up.
Yeah. And it feels like I always like this for a dissolution of the ego. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily feel good, but it might be that, we got a bit egoic about something, and we're coming to the realization that we've got to let that go. It's either not a part of our identity anymore, or it doesn't need to be a part of our world anymore. And I think it's really interesting because the sun's like coming towards that square with Jupiter, but it doesn't happen actually until the sun moves into Capricorn. So it's almost like it's chasing something, but it needs to move through a doorway for the realization or the opportunity to actually manifest.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it'll be it'll be eye-opening time, as any sun transit is, right? Because that's how we are chipped away at. That's how we develop our individual selves and like what our journey and mission is. And so it'll be definitely a purposeful time. At the same time, that's when last quarter in Virgo is happening, as I was talking about earlier in the program, of like
Mm,
moving parts in the physical world, right? And so when things are
yeah,
moving around you that, are of tangible nature, a lot of times we come to this, who am I now? How am I changing? Where is this go? You have these kind of like bigger questions about life, or just kind of processing who you are within the changing dynamic. Because, we have that mutable fire energy, the mutable earth energy. And at the same time, some of the defining factors of the last days of the season are Mercury, trining the North Node there and getting ready to meet Uranus. But most importantly, Jupiter is at the last degrees of Pisces, and right before the season ends, Jupiter moves into Aries, which is a big, that's how we go out here, which is very
yeah,
intriguing, especially since the Capricorn season is going to start with basically a Sun Jupiter square. And so any last anything to say about that Jupiter and Aries return?
yeah. It feels like, this is still a sign-based trine between the two of them, really. I mean, one's on the first, the 0 degree of the fire sign, and the other is on the last. So it's almost like the baton being passed between the two. The sun is like, right, I know a lot about you, Jupiter. And it's almost like he's giving him a bit of rocket fuel in that baton to
Oh,
go,
I love that.
okay, forward you go. Because, if we think, what did Jupiter get to? 8 degrees of Aries,
Uh-huh.
and then started to retrograde back. And, my colleague Cassandra Tyndall, she talks about it beautifully as a false start. That sense that you've started to run the race and then the gun goes off twice. And you're like, oh, I've got to go back to the finish line again. So now it's an opportunity to go, right, how am I going to readjust my stance? I know a little bit about the players that I'm competing against, and I can get myself ready for that burst of energy out of the blocks to really go forward. So I think it's exciting, and it feels like it's the fact that they're both still meeting while in the fire signs. It's like, a little bit late, but at least it's coming through.
Ah, I love that. I feel like the idea of the false start. Now we're at 29 degrees of Sag. We got vision. So,
Yeah.
we got that the passing of the baton, the vision is more developed. And now we're actually going to
Yes.
have the momentum through for the first half of the next year to carry that forward. So I love that. That's a great way of looking at it. All right. So Alicia, if you had one word to describe Sagittarius season, what would it be?
Hopeful.
Oh, I like that. Everyone needs some hope. We all need some hope.
I
Oh my
know, I
gosh.
know.
I
Hope,
know.
faith, belief, all the
I-
things.
yeah. Maybe I'll piggyback with faith. It's like we have the hope, keep the faith. We're going somewhere here. Whatever has
Yeah.
left the building, or whatever we're dealing with, there's this really burst of new on the horizon, especially next year. Like, and Gray and I will talk about that in our upcoming year ahead here. So wait for that.
Oh,
It's
cool.
coming very soon.
Yeah.
Here, but
Love
I love
Gray.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Alicia, where can people find you? What you got going on?
AliciaYusuf.com is my website. And if people sign up for my newsletter, they'll actually get a free ebook on Jupiter and Aries. So that's something that they'll be able to download straight away. So you can get yourself ready for the next kind of December through May period with that. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, AliciaYusuf.astrologer. and on Facebook too, but I'm rarely on there. So stick with the gram. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will definitely share a blog post with Alicia's information there. Definitely sign up for that ebook. You're going to need it when Jupiter moves back into Aries. And you can find me over at energeticprinciples.com and also on Instagram at the same place. And you can sign up for my Heavenly Wind newsletter, which is just reformatted. I have a new, more concise edition that I write now that is not Saturn and Virgo'd out. So I'm happy with this new format. So if you haven't signed up for it, come on over. It is free and it only comes out once a month, and that's the only email you get from me. But other than that, sharing is caring. Spread this podcast or the YouTube video wherever you see fit. Leave a review, leave a comment in the feed below if you're watching on YouTube, because I love to hear from you and what you have going on. Other than that, we'll be back with Gray here shortly for the year ahead, and then also the Capricorn season, which will be big, so stay tuned. But Alicia, thank you so much for joining me on the program again. It was really a pleasure chatting with you.
It's always a pleasure chatting with you, Mel. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Good luck, everyone. And as always, may the stars be with you.